Greetings. The nation's 16th president, Abraham Lincoln, spent his formative years in Spencer County, Indiana. His life there is celebrated at Lincoln State Park and Lincoln Boyhood National Memorial in Spencer County. Before getting started, I would encourage you to subscribe to the Mossy Feet Books YouTube channel for more great content. If you like my videos, please hit the like button. The more likes I get, the more YouTube will show it to other people, allowing me to grow the channel. I also encourage you to visit my website, www.mossyfeetbooks.com. There you will find sample chapters, podcasts, a slew of content, and links to where you can buy my books. While visiting the website, you can subscribe to it and receive email notifications of when I publish a new book or other content like this video and podcast. This episode is based on my book, Southwest Indiana Road Trips. My book, Lincoln State Park, also goes into more detail about Lincoln's presence in the area and the history of the park. If you like what I'm doing, please purchase a book as it helps fund my work. Abraham Lincoln lived from February the 12th, 1809 until April the 15th, 1865. The son of Thomas and Nancy Hanks Lincoln, Abraham was native to Sinking Spring Farm near Hodgenville in Kentucky. The Lincoln family moved to Indiana in 1816 from Kentucky after Abraham's father, Thomas, lost his land due to faulty land titles. After learning that Indiana had better land title laws, Thomas moved the family north of the Ohio River to Indiana. The Lincolns were also strongly opposed to slavery. Kentucky was a slave state and Indiana a free state, so Thomas chose Indiana. The Lincolns squatted on public land in Spencer County while Thomas worked as a cabinet maker, carpenter, and farmer. Eventually, he acquired clear title to 80 acres of this land in Spencer County. Thomas Lincoln's wife, Nancy, died of milk fever on October the 5th, 1818, leaving Thomas and his children, Abraham and Sarah, motherless. The milk sickness is caused by drinking milk contaminated by a poison from the plant white snake root. Cattle that eat the plant transmit it through their flesh and milk, poisoning any that consumes it. No one knew the cause of the disease during this time. It was not until Anna Pierce Hobbs Bixby, known as Dr. Ann, discovered the source of the disease in the 1860s. She discovered that the cause after conversations with an old Cherokee woman. After her research, preventative measures were possible. Sarah Bush Johnson's husband, Daniel Johnson, died of cholera in 1816, leaving Sarah and her 3 children destitute. Hearing of their plight, Thomas Lincoln traveled to Kentucky, proposed to her, and the two married on December the 2nd, 1819. Sarah Bush Johnson lived from December the 13th, 1788, until April the 12th, 1869. The daughter of Christopher and Hannah Bush, Sarah was native to Hardin County, Kentucky. Thomas and Sarah had become acquainted while they both lived near Elizabethtown, Kentucky, before Lincoln moved his family to Indiana in 1816. When Nancy died 2 years later, Thomas heard that Sarah was a widow. Sarah's husband, Daniel, had accumulated some debts which Sarah could not pay. Thomas reportedly traveled to Kentucky, arrived at her door, and knocked. He proposed to her and then offered to pay her debts. She accepted the proposal. The two married on December the 2nd, 1819, and Sarah traveled to Spencer County with her 3 children. She took over as mother to young Abraham and Sarah Lincoln. Sarah was illiterate, however. She encouraged young Abraham with his studies. Abraham would address Sarah as Mama right from the start. At her insistence, Thomas had wooden planks planed and installed in the cabin to cover the dirt floor. He also installed a greased paper window. A greased paper window consists of grease-coated paper. Many frontier families used this inexpensive window in lieu of expensive glass to admit light into dimly lighted cabins and to keep birds, insects, winds, and other unwanted intruders from the cabin. After Lincoln attained his law practice and later the presidency, he continued to visit Sarah for the rest of his life as circumstances permitted. Abraham loved to read and write, a skill that Sarah, his new stepmother, encouraged. Lincoln received very little formal education. He would walk miles to borrow a neighbor's book, which were in short supply on the frontier areas of Indiana. Thus, the education Lincoln received on the frontier was largely what he could learn by reading books. Lincoln grew to 6 foot 4 inches tall and possessed great physical strength. He learned to wield an axe, becoming an expert rail splitter, an important skill on the frontier. His wrestling skills were also unmatched. as displayed when he bested the leader of a small group of ruffians known as Clary's Grove Boys. Around the age of 15, Abraham Lincoln worked as a hired hand for local farmer James Taylor. The rough work included butchering and other farm chores. He also operated Taylor's Ferry, ferrying passengers across the Anderson River, which served as a key transportation link during that era. Inspired, young Abe built a rowboat which he used to ferry passengers across the river. He earned $1 on his first trip, which seemed like almost a fortune to the boy. Taylor's Ferry crossed the Anderson River, which is a 50-mile-long river that forms the boundary of Perry and Spencer counties. Lincoln greatly enjoyed ferrying people across the river, gave him opportunity to converse with many people as they went about their affairs. The Lincoln Ferry Park on Indiana State Road 66, just west of Troy, Indiana, is the location of a historical marker denoting the site of the ferry. Tradition also says that it was here that the Lincolns crossed the Ohio from Kentucky in 1818. It is a spot where Lincoln earned money ferrying passengers to and from riverboats anchored offshore. His business anchored local ferry owners who tried to stop him. He decided to study law and went on to defend himself in court against the ferry owners. He won the case, sparking a lifelong quest for knowledge and fairness. His love affair with the law began with this case. It was his flatboat voyages to New Orleans that firmed up his revulsion against slavery. The flatboat was the primary means farmers in the Mississippi River Valley watershed used to transport goods to ports at New Orleans for sale. A flatboat was a regular flat-bottomed boat that used to transport both passengers and freight. Flatboat operators used two long paddles called broadhorns to navigate downstream. A canopy usually covered part or all of the flatboat as protection for the crew and cargo. A farmer unskilled in boat building could build a flatboat using coarse timbers and fill it with his excess harvest. Building a boat was somewhat expensive, costing about $75 to build. A boat could hold about $3,000 worth of crop, so the investment was worthwhile. The agricultural products transported included corn, wheat, potatoes, flour, hay, tobacco, cotton, and whiskey. Farmers also transported livestock like chickens, cows, and pigs. At the end of the voyage, the boat was sold. It would usually bring about $15. The men during Lincoln's time usually returned to farm by steamboat. While a child in Kentucky, Lincoln was exposed to slavery, as there was dissension in the area where Lincolns lived. The Lincolns were anti-slavery, but there were many slave areas in the owner. The division created many conflicts, so many, in fact, that the church the Lincolns attended had to close due to conflict over the practice. Thomas Lincoln had lost 2 farms in Kentucky due to land title confusion. He bought the farms and established homesteads, then lost them when he found he did not hold clear title to them. The Lincolns left Kentucky for Indiana because the new state had better land survey and title laws. He also wanted to live in a free state. The Northwest Ordinance had forbidden slavery in the Indiana Territory, but there were slaves in the territory when Thomas came to the area in 1815 to locate a suitable farm. When the family moved in 1816, Indiana was on the way to statehood and would be a free state. Though some slaves remained in Indiana for several years, there were probably few, if any, in the neighborhood in which the Lincolns settled. Thus, Lincoln's first real exposure to slavery was on this flatboat trip to New Orleans. It was the second that firmed his stance against it. During the trip, he saw slaves whipped and beaten. It was a slave auction that revolted him the most. During the auction, a mulatto girl was examined like a buyer expecting a horse. Revolted by the scene, he said to his companions, quote, "By God, boys, let's get away from this. If I ever get a chance to hit that thing, I'll hit it hard," unquote. Few experiences defined Abraham Lincoln's outlook on slavery than his 1828 trip to New Orleans as an employee of merchant James Gentry. Historians have determined that the date for his departure from Rockport for New Orleans was on the April 18th or the 19th, 1828. They began their 1,300-mile journey from Rockport, Indiana. The flatboat, powered by a river's current, travels at a speed somewhat under 5 miles per hour. The flatboat would cover about 60 miles per day. The boat was approximately 15 feet by 40 feet and filled with a cargo of pork, flour, meal, and potatoes. Allen Gentry, Thomas Gentry's son, accompanied Abraham on the journey. As the sun went down each day, the young men would find a suitable spot along the bank and tie up to sleep for the night. As they approached the end of their journey near Convent, Louisiana, a gang of 7 men attacked them with sticks. The gang, probably escaped slaves, only retreated when young Gentry yelled at Abraham, imploring him to get the guns and shoot their attackers. The men retreated, not knowing that Gentry and Lincoln had no guns. Both men received injuries during the struggle. The scar, noticeable on later photographs of him, bore testament to one of them. They would arrive in New Orleans on either May the 14th or the 17th. Lincoln would have observed the slice of plantation life along the Mississippi as a flatboat made its silent trip downriver. James Gentry had authorized Lincoln to sell the cargo for cash or trade for cotton, tobacco, and sugar. Which he could also sell. The flatboat docking area on the Mississippi River was between Notre Dame Street, St. Peter's, and New Orleans Parish. St. Peter's Street runs parallel with the river at this point. Steamboat and sailing dock ships were located on the north of the flatboat area. After disposing of the cargo, Lincoln and Gentry probably used money belts to stow the cash on their persons for safekeepings. New Orleans had the largest slave market in the United States. Many slave-selling firms had markets in the city. Most of these markets were close to the river. Slave dealers found that they could buy slaves cheap in the northern regions of the South and sell them for a profit to plantation owners in the Deep South. Since Congress had banned slave importation after 1808, the slave market in the United States consisted of domestic slaves. Well over 500,000 slaves were traded in the years between 1820 and 1860. In New Orleans, the slaves were kept in slave pens, which were basically jails. Men and women were kept in separate sections. Many were sold while still on the boats in the transit downriver, but most ended up in these pens. The slave traders fed these people well and allowed them to exercise. This kept them in good condition, thus assuring a higher price when sold. Lincoln and Gentry would have seen these pens and the nearby markets while they sold their flatboat cargo. The sight of slaves being auctioned repulsed him. Once they had sold their cargo, Lincoln and Gentry would have stowed the cash on themselves and taken passage on a steamboat. The return voyage would have taken about 2 weeks, putting them back in Rockville sometime in early June. Fearing another outbreak of milk sickness, the Lincoln family migrated to Illinois in 1830. Lincoln migrated to New Salem in Illinois in 1832. He joined a partnership with Denton Offutt to purchase a general store. He also served as a postmaster for a time. It was during these years that Lincoln honed the storytelling skills that would serve him in politics later on. The store, however, faltered, and Lincoln sold his share after a few years. The Black Hawk War broke out in 1832. Lincoln enlisted in the volunteer militia unit. The members of the militia elected him as a captain. Lincoln's company did not see any combat during the short war. However, his experiences with seeing the slain combatants of the Stillman's Run and Kellogg's Grove battlefields deeply disturbed him. Lincoln's stint with the militia had interrupted his first campaign for office, his attempt to win a seat in the Illinois state legislature in 1832. In the election, he placed 8th out of 13 candidates. Since the top 4 finishers won seats, Lincoln was eliminated. Afterward this election, he decided to become a lawyer. He achieved this by reading the commentaries on the laws of England, gaining admittance to the Illinois bar in 1837. He won his next campaign as a member of the Whig Party in 1834. Upon his admittance to the bar in 1836, he moved to Springfield in 1837 to partner with John T. Stuart. Lincoln found to make a living as a lawyer, he had to travel, so he migrated with the court's movements. During these years, Lincoln developed a reputation as a tough trial lawyer. He also met his future wife, Mary Todd, Stuart's cousin, at a social function. Lincoln and Mary Todd Lincoln became engaged in 1840 and had a wedding date set for January the 1st, 1841. However, Lincoln canceled it. The couple once again became engaged and married on November the 4th, 1842. Lincolns would go on to have 4 sons, 3 of which would die young. Lincoln focused on growing his law practice from the years 1837 until 1847. He mounted an unsuccessful campaign for the House of Representatives in 1843. However, in 1847, he won a seat as a Whig, promising to serve only one term. He opposed the policies of Andrew Jackson and supported the Whigs. He co-sponsored a bill that would have abolished slavery in Washington, D.C. Additionally, the bill would have compensated their owners. The Whig Party refused to support the bill, so he dropped it. True to his word, he declined to run for re-election in 1849 and returned to his law practice. During the years between 1849 and 1857, Lincoln returned to focus to his legal practice. His reputation as a lawyer led to his nickname, Honest Abe. He appeared in front of the Illinois Supreme Court in 175 cases, 51 times as the sole counsel. He won 31 of these cases. Congress passage of the 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act reignited his interest in politics. The Republican, the Kansas-Nebraska Act repealed the earlier 1820 Missouri Compromise, which banned slavery in areas north of 36 degrees 30 minutes parallel. The Missouri Compromise had been integral to the Union staying intact before the Civil War. The Kansas-Nebraska Act repealed this compromise and allowed territories north of that parallel to submit the question of slavery to the people for a vote. The passage of the act led to the formation of the Republican Party. The Republican Party has its roots in political factions opposed to the 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act. Anti-slavery people began holding small meetings in Ripon, Wisconsin in March 1854. The movement began growing until a mass meeting of people opposed to the act and slavery on July 6, 1854, attracted over 10,000 people to Ripon, Wisconsin. Dubbed the Under the Oaks Convention because the heat of the July sun forced the people to move their meeting to a nearby oak grove, the group vowed that we will cooperate and be known as Republicans. The movement grew to include African Americans, Northern white Protestants, businessmen, professionals, factory workers, and farmers. Many Whigs, Free Soil Party members, and disaffected Democrats joined the movement. The party held its first convention in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on February the 22nd, 1856. At this convention, the fledgling party elected a governing committee, passed resolutions calling for an end to slavery, and vowed to use every constitutional means at their disposal to end the practice. They held their first presidential nominating convention in the summer of 1856, nominating John C. Fremont as their first candidate. In 1860, they would nominate Abraham Lincoln as their presidential standard bearer. The Republican Party nominated Abraham Lincoln for the Senate in 1858 in hopes of winning the seat from incumbent Stephen Douglas. They hoped to use Lincoln's candidacy to capture the Illinois legislature and give them the opportunity of electing Lincoln to the United States Senate. It was during his acceptance of the nomination speech that he delivered his quote, House Divided speech in which he said, quote, a house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently, half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved, and I do not expect the House to fall, but I do expect that it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other, unquote. After the speech, Lincoln and Douglas held 7 debates, which have become immortalized as the Lincoln-Douglas debates. These debates garnered national attention and helped vault Lincoln into the national stage. The Republicans received more popular votes. However, the Democrat won more seats in the legislature and returned Douglas to the Senate. During the 1860 election, I should add during this time that it was the legislatures that elected the senators and not the people. So if the Democrats would have won the Assembly, Illinois Assembly, then they would have renominated the Democrat Douglas. During the 1860 election, the Republican Party nominated him to be their candidate for President of the United States. He won the election and enraged the southern states which had voted against him en masse. Secession, which had served several times during the years prior to this, once again became an issue. South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union before Lincoln even took office. Lincoln engaged in a whistle-stop tour could go from his home in Springfield to Washington, D.C. The Whistle Stop tour began at approximately 7:30 a.m. on Monday, February the 11th, 1861, and he left for the railway station without his wife, who would join him later. As Lincoln boarded the station train at Springfield's Great Western Railroad Depot, he said to the crowd, quote, "To this place and the kindness of these people I owe everything. I now leave with a task before me greater than that which rested upon George Washington," unquote. During the journey east, he stopped at various places in Illinois and at Lafayette, Indiana. He stopped and he was joined by a committee of Indiana politicians in State Line City. Lincoln spoke before a crowd in Lafayette. He said, while some of us may differ in political opinions, still we are united in one feeling for the Union. We all believe the maintenance of the Union, of every star and every stripe of this glorious flag, and permit me to express a sentiment that upon the Union of the States there shall be between us no difference, unquote. He would stop in Indiana. He would stop at Thorntown, Lebanon, Dinesville, and Indianapolis. There he was greeted at 5 p.m. by Governor Oliver Morton and a 34-gun salute. He joined a procession of 20,000 state legislators, public employees, soldiers, and firemen, and others. And the first time in his journey, he temporarily lost his copies of his inaugural address. After leaving Indianapolis, he boarded the train for Cincinnati. He stopped at Shelbyville, Greensburg, Morris, and Lawrenceburg, and then again at Cincinnati. He had a public reduction held by the German Industrial Association. Lincoln said, quote, "I deem it my duty that I should wait until the last moment for a development then in the present national difficulties before I express myself decidedly what course I shall pursue," unquote. His reluctance to make definitive public statements in the secession crisis was an ongoing theme in the remarks on this journey. The following morning, bound from Milford, Ohio, the tour would cross Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and Maryland. He would arrive in Washington, D.C. on February the 23rd, 1861, as the President Street station. He entered the Capitol quietly, breakfasting with Senator Seward. He then telegraphed his wife with news of his safe arrival and sat for Matthew Brady, photographer. The President-elect was widely ridiculed for his secretive entrance into Washington. Both newspapers and the general public were worried that they had once again elected a weak, indecisive commander-in-chief. Fortunately for the Union, their fears were unfounded. By the time he took office, Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas had followed suit. These states declared themselves unified and formed the Confederate States of America. The Confederates initiated fighting by firing on Fort Sumter off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina, on April the 12th, 1861. The war and accompanying carnage intensified to a war that would last until April the 1st, 1865, when General Ulysses S. Grant defeated Confederate General Robert E. Lee at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. Lincoln had won re-election in 1864. However, he would not live long after the war's end. Union troops, including the 140th Indiana Regiment, captured Fort Anderson in North Carolina on February the 19th, 1865. Advancing Union troops compelled the Confederates to abandon their post quickly. As the Confederates retreated, they dropped their battle flag. A soldier of the 140th Indiana picked up the flag and gave it to his commanding officer, Colonel Thomas Brady. Brady expressed the desire to present the flag to the governor of Indiana, Oliver P. Morton. The battle, ceremony, and events led to the ceremony include a number of interesting occurrences. And the confusing surrounding the capture of the fort, the United States Navy ships positioned off the shore of Fort Anderson thought that Union troops that were advancing into it were Confederate and opened fire. Union troops, thinking fast, began waving white sheets to signal surrender, marking the only time the United States Army surrendered to the United States Navy. The 140th Regiment went on to Washington, D.C. for the scheduled flag presentation that was scheduled for March the 17th, 1865, at the National Hotel. The flag presentation created a decision for President Abraham Lincoln. He was supposed to attend a play during the time of the presentation. Because he and Governor Morton were friends and political allies, Lincoln decided to forego the play and attend the flag presentation. This decision angered a certain actor named John Wilkes Booth, who had planned to kidnap Lincoln during the play. Lincoln, of course, did not materialize at the theater, so Booth returned to his hotel room in the National Hotel. As he returned to his room, he caught a glimpse of Lincoln on the balcony, standing over the flag. During the ceremony, Lincoln delivered one of his more famous speeches. He began, quote, "Fellow citizens, it will be but a very few words that I shall undertake to say. I was born in Kentucky, raised in Indiana, and lived in Illinois, and now I am here, where it is my business to care equally for all the good people of all the states. I am glad to see an Indiana regiment on this day able to present the captured flag to the governor of Indiana. I am not disposed, in saying this, to make a distinction between the states, for all have done equally well." Unquote. The speech went on to speak about a bill under consideration by the Confederacy that would allow slaves to fight in the Confederate Army. He felt that if the Confederacy was ready to take this desperate step, the end of the war must be near. Lincoln's prophecy rang true. The bill to draft the slaves passed. Less than a month later, Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia surrendered, and of course, John Wilkes Booth did not kidnap President Lincoln. Instead, he shattered the nation by assassinating him on April the 14th, 1865. Southern sympathizer and actor John Wilkes Booth assassinated President Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theater on April the 15th, 1865. Lincoln died at 7:22 a.m. on April the 15th. It was just 6 days after Robert E. Lee had surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia to Union General Ulysses S. Grant. The surrender effectively ended the Civil War that had raged across the nation for 4 years. After funeral services in the White House, 1865, after lying in state at the East Room of the White House, after the funeral, an honor guard transported the casket holding the body to the rotunda of the United States Capitol for a ceremonial service. The body lay in state on April the 20th. At 7 o'clock a.m., an honor guard escorted the president to a waiting funeral train that would transport him to Springfield, Illinois for burial. The funeral procession for Lincoln began at 8 o'clock a.m. with around 10,000 people observing. The route the train would take would mirror the route he took on his journey to Washington, D.C. from Springfield and on his inauguration journey in 1861. Before reaching Indiana, the train would travel through Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, and Ohio. The president's son, Todd, who had died in the White House, was disinterred and placed on the train for burial with his father. The president reached the state where he had spent his boyhood, crossing the Ohio border into Richmond at 7 o'clock a.m., April the 30th, 1865. Governor Oliver P. Morton got on the train and accompanied the fallen president to Indianapolis, where Lincoln lay in state in the Capitol Rotunda. Thousands gathered to pay their last respect to the fallen president. Along the way, the train passed through various Indiana towns, including Centerville, Germantown, Cambridge, Knightstown, and Charlottesville. Church bells tolled when crowds gathered to watch the solemn procession stream by. A heavy rain accompanied Lincoln along the route. The rain prevented Governor Morton from delivering his public address. The train departed Indianapolis late in the evening and arrived at Michigan City, Indiana. At Michigan City, the train delayed while Chicago dignitaries gathered to board the train to accompany the president to Chicago. Local officials conducted an unscheduled funeral as they waited. The train departed Michigan City on May the 1st, 1865 at 8:30 a.m. Lincoln left Indiana, the place of his boyhood, for the last time. This episode is based on my book, Southwest Indiana Road Trips, available on the website www.mossyfeetbooks.com. The book is the first book in the 9-volume Road Trip Indiana series. The books include all the historical markers as of 2022 in Indiana with a text and backstory. The books also include a nearly complete listing of virtually every tourism destination in the state. The destinations include parks, museums, drive-in theaters, bowling alleys, wineries, and much, much more. I encourage you to visit the website and subscribe to it. You can find my books locally at the Romway Marketplace in downtown Batesville, Indiana. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and thank you for